Lots of great guitar players out there have blessed us with some fantastic music and some excellent guitar tones to admire to boot. This is a list of the top 20 greatest guitar tones ever. If you are a guitar player out there, chances are there is a guitar tone that you have had in your head or at one point in time or another, and that is the guitar tone that you have strived to sound like at least one. Here is a list of those famous guitar tones that have inspired millions of guitar players around the world. Let's get to it. Number 1, Metallica's Master of Puppets. I was first exposed to this record in 1986 when it came out, and I have been a fan ever since. There seems to be conflicting reports out there as to what gear that James Hetfield and Kirk Hammett used to record the first 2 albums, but by the time their 3rd album, Master of Puppets, rolled around, there was no question James Hetfield had switched over to primarily the Mesa Boogies. This album has a really dark and heavy, brooding sounding guitar tone. If you have followed this channel at all, you are probably aware that James Hetfield is my all-time favorite guitar player. He has been my biggest inspiration on the instrument, and Metallica are my all-time favorite band, and none of those things are likely ever going to change. As I go back and forth as to which of the first 4 or 5 Metallica albums is actually my favorite, and that literally changes just about every single day. However, there has never been any question which of those records, in my opinion, has the best guitar tone. It has and always will be Master of Puppets. This is the metal tone that defined the thrash metal scene in the 1980s. Number 2, Ghost Meliora. I was first exposed to Ghost on this record, particularly the extended EP that came out after the original record came out, and now you can buy the 2 of them together as the deluxe edition of the album. Ironically, most of the popular songs that they play in their live act, such as Square Hammer and I Believe He Is and Nocturnal Me, songs that often make it into their live shows, all came on the extended EP. The first time I heard Ghost, the first song I ever heard was Square Hammer, and the first thing that I noticed was these guys are putting together a hell of a metal act and not doing it with a really heavy guitar tone at all. This is more of a rock tone than anything else, kind of a darker rock tone because I believe they use orange amplifiers, which are much, much darker than, say, a Marshall. But this is proof that you do not have to have the gain cranked up to be a great metal band. Number 3. Judas Priest, Painkiller. I love all the classic Judas Priest stuff. I love British Steel. I love Ram It Down. I love Hellbent for Leather. All that stuff. I'm a huge Judas Priest fan, but none of those records sounded like Painkiller did. Painkiller came out in 1990, I believe, and that also happened to be the same year that this here JCM 900 came out. And the reason why that is significant is because they recorded Painkiller with one of these here JCM 900 amplifiers. Actually, there's 2 of them because both Glenn Tipton and KK Downing had both switched over to the 900s specifically for that record, and both of them have continued to play them ever since. That's one reason why this is one of my favorite Marshall amplifiers, and the reason why I will not get rid of this one. This is actually even one from the same year. I have heard it said that the Marshall JCM 900, particularly the dual reverb, was designed specifically for Judas Priest because they wanted a heavier tone, and this one got it done. No Priest record has ever sounded as heavy as this one before or since. Number 4, Alice in Chains, Black Gives Way to Blue. I almost went with the Faceless record just because I love the sound of We Die Young. The guitar tone on that particular song sounds great, but the truth is the overall guitar tone across the entire record just sounds monstrous on Black Gives Way to Blue. Hats off to Jerry Cantrell for this record, because not only were Alice in Chains up against all odds, this was really their comeback album after the unfortunate passing of lead singer Lane Staley. This was the first record without Lane Staley, and they had replaced him with an at that time unknown lead singer, in this case by the name of William Duvall. Usually when bands go through lead singer changes like that, that's usually the beginning of the end. In this case, Jerry Cantrell wasn't about to let that happen, and he used this as an opportunity to restart and rebuild and rebirth Alice in Chains, and they've been going stronger than ever since. As far as what Jerry Cantrell used on this record, he used a myriad of different amplifiers. My understanding, he used some of his old Marshalls, he used some of his old Bogners, he used some of his newer Friedman amplifiers, and there were parts of this record where he tracked the guitar 11 times. No wonder it sounds killer. Number 5, Van Halen's self-titled record. Come on, we all knew this album was going to show up on this list. This record changed the entire direction of guitar playing as a whole. When the world first discovered Eddie Van Halen, a new guitar hero was born, and nobody had ever done anything that he was doing on this album. This is the record that married the humbucker and the whammy bar, and particularly the Floyd Rose. And come on, if you don't just love the intro to Ain't Talking About Love and the guitar tones that he got, and one of the greatest and most recognizable guitar solos ever, also known as Eruption, you just don't love guitar. Number 6, Stevie Ray Vaughan's Texas Flood. The truth is, I probably could have put any Stevie Ray Vaughan studio album on this list, but Texas Flood is probably the most well-known and the most popular. That's the one that has Pride and Joy on it, among several other of his more popular songs. When I think of the term blues guitar tone played on a Strat, Stevie Ray Vaughan is absolutely what comes to mind. And I know that I am not alone in that, because even today, there are millions of Stevie Ray Vaughan clones everywhere. Even today, after he's been gone for over 25 years, he is still one of the most popular guitar players on the planet, and there are more people out there now trying to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan than probably any other guitar player. You don't believe me? Go into your local guitar shop and hang out for a while. It won't be long until somebody comes in, pulls a Strat off the wall, plugs into a Fender amp, and starts playing Stevie Ray Vaughan licks. There's a reason why those players are everywhere. Number 7, Pink Floyd's The Wall. There is not too many guitar players out there that can say that they wrote a song with not one but two of the most recognizable and well-known guitar solos ever. The Wall featured tons and tons and tons of great guitar tones across. It was a giant double album, and among the best on the entire album has to be David Gilmour's tones on Comfortably Numb. Just the mere mention of that song, I bet you already have the first few opening notes of both of those solos running through your head right now. Number 8, Halford, Resurrection. There was a period in Judas Priest history when Rob Halford had actually left the band to embark on a solo career, and one of the bands that he was in during that solo career was a band named after himself called Halford. And the album that they put out and subsequently toured behind was called Resurrection. I don't have the CD handy here for me to pull out, look at the album jacket to see who all played on that record. But even if I did, it wouldn't matter, because I already know it was a bunch of musicians that nobody's ever heard of. And whoever it was that he got to play guitar on that record knew what he was doing when it came to dialing in a guitar tone. And that's why that album did so well. Not only was a guy a monster guitar player, but he sounded killer. Whoever he was. Number 9, Motley Crue's self-titled album. Yes, this is the one without Vince Neil, the one that Motley Crue still to this day refuses to acknowledge. This is the album that Motley Crue put out during the brief period in the 90s when Vince Neil had actually left the band and was replaced with John Corabi on lead vocals. Dr. Feelgood record will always be my favorite Motley Crue album, but none of them sounded as good as their self-titled record. Mick Mars used a myriad of different amplifiers. It's kind of, reports are kind of vague as to what he used. I know he used some older Marshalls as well as a VHT power amp of some kind, among other things. He said the producer was bringing in all kinds of stuff for him to try out, and he tried a number of things, and I got to assume that he initially just ended up stacking them all, tracking them all on top of one another. when it was all said and done, because it is to this day the thickest, fattest sounding hard rock / metal tone I have ever heard. Number 10, Dire Straits' self-titled record. Again, another band that I could have probably mentioned any of their studio records. However, this is the one that had Sultans of Swing on it. Sultans of Swing is an awesome, very well-known classic rock song, and there's not an ounce of distortion on it anywhere. It was Mark Knopfler with his Strat plugged straight into a clean amplifier, and once again, proof that clean guitar rocks just as much as anything else. Number 11, Led Zeppelin, Zeppelin II. I almost went with Zeppelin IV just because of Stairway to Heaven. However, the truth is, with those opening riffs to tracks like Whole Lotta Love and Heartbreaker and Livin' Lovin' Maid and so many others, every single one of those is so iconic, not just for, the way that those songs were written, but because, the guitar tone and, on all of those songs and that entire record is just killer. Jimmy Page has always had a knack for great guitar tone using lots of different things. Of course, he's most famous for his Gibson Les Pauls and his Marshall stacks. I think he was probably one of the earliest artists to show the world what a cranked up Marshall can really do. And everything about this album, of course, is iconic. And the ironic thing about it is it still sounds great, despite the fact that there are artifacts all over that record of airplanes flying over and dogs barking outside and traffic driving by and stuff like that. They left all that stuff in there intentionally just to give the album more character. Number 12, Cinderella, Long Cold Winter. That opening riff to Gypsy Road is, to me, exactly what a Les Paul standard plugged straight into a Marshall JCM 800 is supposed to sound like. Whenever I have a Les Paul in my hand and I plug it straight into a Marshall JCM 800, if it doesn't sound like Gypsy Road, something's wrong. Because it doesn't sound like Gypsy Road. Gypsy Road is a Les Paul into a Marshall JCM 800 defined. Oh, and by the way, it's also a great song with a great riff, and one that I personally use to demo gear on this channel probably a lot more often than I should. Number 13, Eric Johnson, Avia Musicom. This was one of the earliest guitar albums that I was exposed to as a young teenager, and it was also at a time when Metallica were getting to be really, really popular, and the hair metal stuff was also still really, really popular, and lots of other bands out there were trying to come up with these, trying to record these great, great metal tones. And along comes Eric Johnson with a Strat into a small Fender combo without the gain turned up very much at all, and outplayed just about every one of them. There is something so unique about Eric Johnson's Strat tone, particularly on that record, that is just mesmerizing to me. To this day, I can still put in Avia Musicom and listen to the entire thing front to back. I don't skip any tracks. I listen to all of it, every single note on every single song. I love everything about that album. Number 14, Godsmack, Faceless. This is another band whose guitar tones I have always loved, and I, could have put just about any one of their albums on here. However, the reason why I went with Faceless was simply because of the track Realign. If you're not familiar with that song, it has a really, really heavy guitar tone, but it also has a lot of clarity and a lot of definition to it. They're strumming full chords during that entire song, and you can hear every single note. Thank you very much, Diesel Amplifiers. Number 15, Ozzy Osbourne, No More Tears. I admit I'm a little bit biased on this one because I'm such a huge Zakk Wylde fan, but while he certainly got plenty of great sounding guitar tones on his first record with Ozzy Osbourne, No Rest for the Wicked, this was the album, I think, that defined the Zakk Wylde era with Ozzy Osbourne, which of course we are now on part 2 of as we speak. It was the guitar solo of the title track on this record that sold me and turned me instantly into a Zakk Wylde fan. Prior to having ever heard a note of the solo, if I were to describe to somebody what I think the perfect sounding hard rock guitar solo is supposed to sound like, that's exactly what I would have dialed up. And the thing that I find ironic about Zakk Wylde, particularly in this era, is he was playing, a Les Paul into a JCM 800 like so many other guitar players were at that time, but he took that, essentially industry standard guitar rig setup and totally turned it upside down and started doing something completely different with it from what everybody else was doing. And that's one reason why I think Zakk Wylde's guitar tone, even to this day, is still one of the most recognizable guitar tones out there. Number 16, Sofia Vergara. No, she's not a guitar tone, but man, is she hot. Number 16, Skid Row, Slave to the Grind. Skid Row's first album, which was a self-titled album that came out, I believe, in 1989, was one of the greatest albums that essentially came out right in the middle of the hair metal era, and they get really, really pissed off when you call them a hair metal band because that was the only album they put out during that era, and realistically, it didn't really sound too much like a lot of the other stuff that was coming out back then. So when they decided they were going to record Slave to the Grind, they promised all their fans that it was indeed going to be heavier than their first album, and they delivered. Guitar players Snake Sabo and Scotty Hill decided to go against the grain and start using gear that was not real popular at the time, such as Rivera amplifiers, being the base of their tone on that album. And as I already said, they delivered. Monkey Business is still one of my favorite songs to this day. Number 18, Whitesnake's self-titled album. This album fit right in with the rest of the hair metal bands that were coming out at the time, except these guys were Adrian Vandenberg specifically throughout Whitesnake's history. Of course, they also had Steve Vai there for a period of time as well, and as we know, he is no slouch. But even taking Steve Vai out of it, Adrian Vandenberg's skills as a guitar player were probably a head above everybody else. That dude was pretty good, and he used some really, really unique guitar tones. He had some chorusy types of real light chorus effect, to add just a little bit more character to his sound than everything else did, and the ending result was a really, really heavy sound for that era. He was also doing some really unique things, such as playing his guitar with a bow, something that nobody had really seen anybody do since Jimmy Page had done it back in the 70s. Go listen to the track Still of the Night, and you will probably understand why that was their closer at their live shows for so many years, and I think still is today. Number 18, Steve Vai, Passion and Warfare. There was one guitar album that I was exposed to before Eric Johnson's died via Musicom, and it was Steve Vai's Passion and Warfare. I mentioned earlier in this video that James Hetfield is probably my all-time favorite guitar player. However, the truth is there are plenty of times when he is actually tied for first with Steve Vai. I have always loved everything that Steve Vai has done, and even though I can't play anything like the man does himself, but he has an intuition with the instrument unlike most people that I have ever seen. At this time in his career, I believe he was still using some of the earlier Bogner amplifiers, and of course he's always been an Ibanez guitar player, and as well as probably the inventor of the 7-string guitar. This was right around the time that the Universe came out. Matter of fact, he is pictured on the front of this album with a 7-string Universe. If you have never heard this album, and if you're a guitar player, I will be surprised if you've never heard this album. If you don't want to listen to the whole thing, just go listen to For the Love of God. If you're not in tears by the end of hearing that song for the first time, there's something wrong with you. Number 19, Dream Theater's Images and Words. Right around the time when Steve Vai's Passion and Warfare came out, Steve Vai was already a pretty well-known guitar player and had made a name for himself playing with the likes of Frank Zappa and David Lee Roth and Whitesnake, among others. Right around that same era was another guitar player on the scene whose name was far less recognizable by the name of John Petrucci. Images and Words was not Dream Theater's first album, but it was the first one that I ever discovered. And I had two thoughts running through my mind the first time that I heard this record. The first thought was, oh my God, there's another guitar player out there as good as Steve Vai. And the second thought was, this guy sounds as good as Steve Vai, but he sounds a lot heavier. This is another one of those albums that I can listen to front to back without skipping a single track. The whole thing is just so beautifully written and extremely complex. One of the most complex hard rock metal songs I have ever heard in my life is the first song on this album, called Pull Me Under. It's over 7 minutes long, and there are so many changes in it. I don't know how anybody could possibly learn to play it front to back and play it correctly. But John Petrucci can do it, and that guitar tone sound, it was probably about 10 to 15 years ahead of its time. Really, really heavy, really, really clear and articulate sounding with a lot of definition. And this album was recorded when he was still an Ibanez player. Number 20, Joe Satriani, Surfing with the Alien. Yeah, I almost didn't include this one because the truth is I'm really not much of a Joe Satriani guy. I respect him, and I know that he was Steve Vai's mentor, and was great. One of Steve Vai's mentors anyway, and is as great of a guitar player, Steve Vai, and so many other people out there. He's one of the best that have ever walked this planet. I absolutely acknowledge that. I make no dispute. For whatever reason, his music just didn't really resonate with me quite as much as some of those other names that I mentioned. Until about a month ago, when for some reason I got a wild hair and decided to throw in Surfing with the Alien. And man, am I glad that I did, because I had, not only does the guitar sound great across the entire album, he was using some effects on that album like analog delay, which at that time was totally unheard of. In the mid 80s, it was digital delay or bust. It was chorus and stuff. Joe Satriani totally went against the grain of all the trends of that era. That album came out in 1986, I believe. And the end result was a masterpiece of guitar work and loads and loads and loads of killer guitar tones, all of which are still relevant today with millions of guitar players, again, trying to sound just like it. So that is all for this list. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I always enjoy putting together lists like this for these videos, just like this one. I really, really do enjoy it. It's fun for me. It's fun for you guys. It gives us all a chance to kind of interact together a little bit differently. Anyway, so I hope you guys have as much fun with it as I do. So leave me a comment down below. Let me know what what are your favorite guitar tones, and some great records that have inspired you to sound like what you sound like. I will leave any pertinent links down in the description for you as well. I will also leave various different ways that you, my wonderful viewers, can support this channel as well, should you choose to do so. Last but not least, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell right next to it. That way you don't miss out here on future content. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.